Hello and welcome to our live Q&A. Can you hear me, Joel? Just checking a bit.
Yes, I can.
Good, good. Today we're starting without any technical problems. That's
Yeah.
a good start.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm Robert from Press, and with me we have Joel.
Hello.
Yeah, we do these live streams every week on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Central European Time and at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. You can ask us any questions during the live session. However, if you are watching a recorded session, and yeah, you can always send us questions later and we'll answer them in the next session via email at questions@malapress.com. Last week, we discussed and answered a number of questions about restoring a hacked WordPress website. You can watch the live discussion on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. And this week, kind of, we'll be progressing to the next step of the process. So basically, as Joel mostly explained last week, we restored the website, everything is functioning now, back to how it was before it was hacked. And so, of course, the next step is to harden your website. It's quite important, of course, because when you harden your website, you lower the risk of getting hacked. Hacked websites are still, unfortunately, a very common problem. I was just looking at some online statistics. PatchSec and Sucuri together published the State of WordPress Security Report. Just last year alone, Sucuri observed over 500,000 infected websites. The biggest causes are most common cause of hacked websites are still like compromised credentials, stolen cookies, and second is like vulnerabilities in either WordPress core plugins and themes. These are all small issues which, as we will see today, definitely by addressing, if you address and implement what we will be discussing today, you won't have these problems. I mean, there's a lot that can be done in terms of WordPress security. You can really go, it really depends on the size of your website and the functionality and what you're doing. But by taking care, and today quite frankly covering some of the basics, and even like by just following these basics, you will still like be quite in a very good place. And in most cases, it's more than enough. But then, of course, it depends. If you have customizations and stuff, then it's you need to do more. A few important notes before we start. Whatever we'll be discussing today, it's important to point out that WordPress security is not like a one-time fix. It's similar to SEO, it's like an ongoing process. So you have to, from time to time, check what you've been doing, keep things up to date and stuff like that. And it will keep changing as the website changes, as new attacks are discovered, new features are added to the website. Like you have to keep on keep doing certain processes and stuff to make sure your website is kept secure. It's important. It might sound like a lot. It doesn't have to be very complicated. You will see today that like on a typical website, you might need a few hours during the hardening process because you need to implement a number of things. But once you implement those things, just running the website, it only takes a few minutes per week or per month. So we can start the discussion. Joel, from where, like, in your opinion, like from where, so let's say you have a clean website now, you removed all the infections, you've scanned it for malware and stuff. There are a lot of things you can do, but let's say from where do you typically start? Like what's the number one step?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, one of the main sort of causes for a hacked website are the credentials. So we will be looking at those first, having a password policy, and on top of that, two-factor authentication. So starting with password policies, most users, given the chance, will use a weak password, one they can remember easily. And that's the first issue. And the second issue is that the same password is used on multiple sites. So at that point, you have to worry about your security and the security of other websites where the user might be using the same password on. Because if the other website gets hacked, and the passwords are stolen and then sold on the dark web, for example, and used in credential stuffing, then suddenly, no matter how strong the passwords are, there's a greater chance of a breach. So basically, we will need to tackle these issues. So password policy, making sure that the passwords follow best practices with regards to password length, complexity, uh, a mixture of uppercase and lowercase characters, alphanumeric characters, special characters, and so forth. We need to make sure that passwords expire, so that's every month, every 3 months, passwords get changed. And we discourage or forbid, ideally, recycling of old passwords. Now, there's basically two ways that we can do this. We can either ask the users nicely, maybe send an email like, please, can you please follow these instructions when setting up your password, and hope for the best. Or else we can use a plugin.
Good. Yeah. You mentioned some very good points, which I meant to kind of like expanding on a bit. So yeah, definitely by enforcing certain password policies, you're encouraged users to use like stronger passwords. I think one thing to point out, like, the reason why users prefer to use simpler passwords, because of course to keep and the reason why they use simpler password and they use the same password on a number of services they have online, like their Gmail account, their work websites, and other stuff. The reason why they do it is because it's difficult to remember strong passwords for different websites. So it's also important to raise awareness, make users aware of software like password managers, because in a password manager, basically you don't only need to remember one password, which is the password for your vault, and in that vault you can store the different passwords of the different websites, different services that you have, which of course kind of like, at least it encourages the users to use I wouldn't say it encourages, but it doesn't make it difficult for users to come up with difficult passwords. Also, like most of this software, usually they auto-suggest passwords. So the security, the strength of the passwords and credentials on your website doesn't really depend on the user's capability of coming up with a strong password, So that helps a lot. But of course, as you were saying, in an ideal world, everyone uses a password manager, but it's not the case. So yes, definitely by enforcing password policies and maybe helping your users and making them aware of password managers, that helps a lot. However, you can never stop them. You don't have control, especially if they're using the same passwords on other services which you don't have control on, like their personal Gmail or stuff like that. So I would say like there are different things you can do. For example, like it depends on the type of user as well. Like if it's a subscriber user, I mean, it's still good that they are not hacked. Of course, it's never good that an account is hacked, but there's a difference between having a subscriber user account hacked on your website and an administrator account. So the next step, which you mentioned briefly, and we can expand on, there's 2FA, two-factor authentication. Maybe you can start. Ideally, you should enforce 2FA on everyone, but if it doesn't work, at least you should enforce 2FA on the users that at least have some sort of administrators and edit privileges. Joe, you want to maybe expand for those who are not familiar, like what is 2FA exactly, and why, regardless of the password, how strong or weak it is, like how it helps, kind of thing, with stopping accounts being hacked?
Yeah, sure. So 2FA is short for two-factor authentication. And what it means essentially is that so when you enter your username and password, you are authenticating. So with two-factor authentication, you have to authenticate twice.
Good.
First with your username and password, and then with something else. One of the most used 2FA methods is authenticator apps, which is called OTP, which stands for one-time passcode. And the idea is that even if the password gets compromised, gets stolen, it's highly unlikely that whoever stole the password is going to access your OTP as well, because usually it's on your phone, and it's unlikely they're going to get access to your phone as well, which makes it more secure. Most services these days, whether it's Gmail, Facebook, all use 2FA because it is very strong. It offers strong security. So most users are familiar with 2FA these days. So there isn't like a barrier to entry, and most users are used to it. So it's all fine. As you very well said, Robert, it's maybe accounts which have administrative access. We should definitely enforce 2FA on them. Perhaps more so than subscribers, but ideally it should be for everyone, because you can have a vulnerability that offers privilege escalation, and suddenly the subscriber account is getting access to administrator privileges. On WordPress, it does not. It's not available out of the box, but with a plugin, you can very easily implement two-factor authentication. OTP is not the only method available. So even if users don't have a smartphone, for example, you can send code via email, you can send a link via email, you can send SMS. There's are hardware keys such as YubiKeys. There are passkeys. These days there are a few different options. So things like SMS aren't as secure, for example, as hardware key or OTP, but it's still more secure than not having 2FA. So if you have some users or customers who don't have a smartphone, for example, then you can still offer either email or SMS or whatever the case may be, basically.
Good. Yeah, as Joel highlighted, there are quite a few different options when it comes to 2FA. You also mentioned passkeys at the end. It's important to point out passkeys is something, I mean, in terms of protocol and technology, I think it's around 10 years old or something, but only the last few years it's been pushed forward by Apple, Google, and a few other big players. Passkeys is sort of like, it's still an authentication protocol. It doesn't exactly fit under 2FA, but yeah, it is classified with those types of technologies. So with a passkey, it's actually literally like a passwordless login. Basically, it works on the idea of having a private key on your computer and having and the server having the public key, and you of course authenticate by it. It's still kind of like relatively new. So yeah, and will be, in fact, it's a bit of a side note, we'll be including it in our next update of the WP2FA plugin. Now that we're talking about 2FA, we have perfect timing. We got a question from someone, which is a very nice, good question. Like he or she, they're asking about the password manager, and the question is like, doesn't that mean if a hacker gets the password for the password manager, they gain access to all account? Very good question. First of all, there are different types of password managers. There are ones which you run local on your computer. It's an actual application, so it means they need to get access to your computer to access it. And there are online ones. Online ones typically like some of the big players. So far, they never had any incidents, as far as I'm aware of. So yeah, but yeah, like if someone guesses the password of your password manager, yeah, they can access all your passwords, and that is why like 2FA is important, and that is why something we didn't mention yet, like security. It's not just about like, it's not like just one solution. It's very important. The more kind of like layers you can implement, the more different things you can implement, the better it is. Because as like even if you have a password manager, and let's assume in a worst case scenario, your password manager has been hacked, yeah, at least there's 2FA. And ideally, yeah, the password manager you use should have some sort of like more, shouldn't just maybe rely on a username and password. It should rely maybe, I don't know, on certificates, passkeys, hardware keys. Hardware keys nowadays are very common. They're very cheap. It's just like a simple USB stick, and you just enter the username, connect the USB stick, and it authenticates basically. But yeah, like, so in that case, for example, in the case of USB, of a hardware key, yeah, for someone to hack your account, they need access to the hardware. So they need to guess your username and password, and they need a copy or your actual key, which yeah, physical access. So it's highly unlikely, that they can, unless they have physical access to your hardware. Okay, so I think one of the most common questions I would say I've seen from people coming up with especially with 2FA, many people are kind of like concerned that if they there are two major concerns with 2FA. One of them is that it slows kind of thing, like people from logging in and stuff. But yeah, like as we said, like it's always a trade-off between security and productivity. But as I said, there's also like new technologies coming up, like passkeys that are actually passwordless. They're even much faster than using a username and password. So yeah, and also like different there are different solutions for WordPress. Like you can use a plugin to save the 2FA code for the next 30 days, 90 days. So of course you don't have to enter the one-time code every time you try to log in. But yeah, like the other concern is like what happens if like I use an authenticator app, I'm trying to log in, and one of my users forgot the mobile and also the battery. But like there are solutions. You want to tell us a bit more, like what can we do in this case?
Yeah. So the solution is secondary to FA. So there you can have either a backup code. So backup codes, you pre-download them, you save them somewhere secure. And if you forget your phone, and the battery dies or whatever might happen, then you can use a backup code to access your account. Backup codes can only be used once. So once the code is used, it's done. So you can pre-download, for example, 3 codes, five codes. So you have like a few chances if something happens. So that's one way that you can work around the possibility of something like this happening. Or as, for example, you can have like a secondary to FA method. For example, if your phone dies, then receive a code via email.
Good.
So that you make sure that if your primary method fails, you have a secondary method available.
Good. Yeah. In fact, even with hardware keys, for example, it is recommended if you are using hardware keys to log into a website or any other service, it's recommended to always configure a secondary one. You might never say you might lose the first one. I don't know. Something might malfunction. At the end of the day, it's an electronic device, and with time it might fail. So yeah. So basically, with password policies and 2FA, we are kind of like hardening the authentication process. We're making it more difficult, and in all fairness, just with that, we're already covering like a good chunk. We are securing our website like quite well, because as we said earlier, based on some reports that they were published based on last year, the number one cause of hacked websites are either like hijacked accounts, authentication problems, and stuff like that. So if you there's much more that you can do, and we're going to talk about. But if you do just these two, you're already like quite ahead of the rest. Before we jump into a bit more of hardening techniques, just a quick reminder: like we have these live Q&A sessions every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European Time and at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. If you you can send us the questions live right now. But if you are watching a recorded session, you can always send us your questions via email at questions@wordpress.com. Now, before we jump into more hardening techniques, I think it's important to point out, Joel, that one of the most important things to do is this. By the way, this doesn't just apply to WordPress. This applies to your mobile devices, computer. Like, keep your software up to date. I think Joel, I think that is by far
definitely 100%.
Yeah, as the report we mentioned earlier today from Patch Tech, this second most common reason is like exploited vulnerabilities in software, like plugins and stuff. And like all there's no 100% secure software in the world. There will always be issues. It's a question of when they are discovered. Like that's why it's important to keep always your plugins, WordPress core, themes, and any other software you use, including your mobile device and everything, up to date. So at least whenever you do that, there are publicly known issues about the device you're using or the software you're using. That is, I think, way before password and everything. That should be kind of like a given that you always keep your things up to date. But okay, so we're keeping our software up to date. We have password policies, so we're hardening the authentication. We have 2FA. What else can we do, Joe? Like to make sure, like, go a step further and make it a bit more difficult, add another layer and make it a bit more difficult for attackers
Yeah,
to
yeah.
hack our website.
Yeah, so just to expand a little bit on what you just said, so you can never eliminate risk. You can reduce it, and the more things that you do, the more you are reducing the risk of a breach. Which is why, it comes to WordPress security, you can't just install a firewall and call it a day. Because
Correct.
something can happen, the plugin can have a vulnerability, or whoever is trying to breach will find a way around it. So that's why it's very, very important to try and implement as many things as possible, because with each one, you're lowering the risk that much, basically. Having said that, the next thing that we should do is limit login attempts. So,
What does it mean? Like, what is it like?
yeah,
What does it do?
exactly. So, login attempt is someone entering their username and password and pressing login. That's a login attempt. Now, if someone enters the wrong password or the wrong username, that's called a failed login attempt, because they attempted to log in but did not gain access. So what we need to do is we need to limit the number of wrong combinations that a user can enter. And what this does is it protects us from brute force attacks. And brute force attack is basically when an attacker will try different combinations until one of them works. So we need to limit the number of tries that anyone can sort of go through. And that makes sure that once you do that, basically brute force attacks do not work, basically, because what brute force attacks bank on are unlimited tries.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's already, yeah. So basically, you're protecting against dictionary attacks, brute force attacks, and stuff like that. In fact, like a question we get quite often, in fact, as well, related to brute force, dictionary attacks, and stuff. Like, should we be blocking? Because it is recommended, of course, to also have a firewall plugin. That's kind of like a given. So the question we are often asked is, like, should we block the IP addresses that are trying to attack our websites? It's a bit, like, if it's a one-off attack, it's doable. But if you are trying to do it on a large scale, it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, because like there's so many IPs in the world that you can use fake and stuff that if it's a large scale attack, it's virtually impossible to block them all. Like, what do you recommend, Joe, in this case? Like, let's say a solution just in general to kind of like protect your website at a not external, but from brute force attacks, from DDoS attacks maybe, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, blocking IP addresses is a bit of a cat and mouse games, because if someone is attacking your website, they can change their IP address very, very easily. Takes a couple of seconds, and there's an unlimited number of IP addresses they can use, technically speaking. So if you have to block each one, basically it's going to become your full-time job, blocking IPs. So it's not going to be an effective strategy.
They're automated tools, so it's like you're literally like you cannot keep up with it, quite frankly. So
yeah, exactly. So one way that might be a bit more effective is geo-blocking, where basically you block requests from an entire country. Of course, not going to be 100% effective, because if they change their IP, they can change IP to a different country. But you're not just blocking one IP, you're blocking multiple IPs at that point. Or IPs
region,
that are exactly. So that is one way that you can do it.
Good. Are there solutions, by the way? There are, of course, there are firewalls. I mean, when we talk about firewalls, there are like plugin firewalls, which are like plugins that you install on your website and run on your website. So in that case, they help little bit when it comes to these things, but they help in general acting as a firewall. But when it comes to these things, it's more about either using some sort of CDN/security services or online firewalls where the traffic actually is routed through them before reaching your website. There are different solutions for WordPress available. Since we're talking about like plugins, firewalls, geo-blocking, these are all things that you can do with plugins or online services. We've got two questions actually. One of them, like, because we've been using a very good point, because we've been using the term website hardening and general WordPress security. We have this question, Joe, like, what is the difference between hardening and general website security? I would say like hardening is like the process of installing the plugins, adding to FA and stuff like, right? And then security is like the maintenance of making sure the website is kept secure. Is that correct, Joel?
Exactly. So basically, hardening, what you're doing is you're taking existing processes and making them more secure. So the WordPress login process is already there. It is secure because it requires username and password, but we can harden it and make it more secure by, for example, having a password policy, adding 2FA on top of it. So that is hardening. Security is more of a general term. So it's more of all of the processes that you can undertake to secure your website. That's including, for example, I don't know, having a firewall, installing, for example, activity logs, something we spoke about last week. So all of these things. But hardening specifically is taking existing processes and making them more secure.
Good. In fact, like related to this, we've got another question another question. What are the best plugins for WordPress hardening? Yeah, as we were explaining, even Joel, there's no like one-time fix. There's not like one plugin that fixes everything. It really depends on your requirements, on your specifications, on what you need and what you're doing. I would say it's more about you should install a number of plugins that do different. So you need definitely, I would recommend a firewall plugin. Definitely, because a lot of people, by the way, I know it's kind of like more like admin, but it's also security. A good backup plugin, reliable backups. That's also very important. We have 2FA plugins for sure. Joel, I think so. We have firewalls, 2FA, backup. What else can we add to the list? Like different type of plugins.
If you're going to implement password policies through a plugin, then something to take care of that, basically. And the last one that I would recommend is an activity log, which is basically at that point, think of it as like an insurance policy. So even if something happens, at least you have a record of who accessed what and from where, and it will make troubleshooting and post-mortem that much easier because you have a record of everything.
Good. I think it's also good to point out, very good to point out. I think it's also good for user accountability. And then, of course, you have the whole question of compliance regulations and stuff like that. But that goes into, but yeah, it's good. I think Activity Log plugin has like a good use for in both scenarios. Okay, so yeah, we cleaned our website. We started hardening. Let's say we implemented some password policies. We added 2FA. We have a firewall plugin. We set up backup just in case we didn't have, and maybe we tested it. We're using a plugin to limit failed login attempts, password policies, maybe just geo-blocking. Maybe we're using SCDN, but again, it depends on what you like to do. I think maybe are there like maybe some techniques for login page hardening, maybe?
Yeah. So then now what we can do next is we can restrict when users can log in. So if, for example, we know that users usually log in between 8 to 5, then Monday to Friday, then we can only allow users to log in during those times. Now, there can be an exception, and then they can send an email or make a request, whatever the case may be. But as a rule of thumb, they can only log in at those times. That ensures that it basically restricts the window through which a bad actor can access our website, basically, or try to breach it, because the account at that point would be inaccessible.
Good. I think some other things we can do as well. We can restrict IP access to the login page if we want to, especially if your login page is always accessed from the same office area, you have fixed IP. That's easy to do. I mean, if you have remote workers, it's a bit more difficult, of course. You can add HTTP authentication. So basically, whoever tries to access the login page, first they have to authenticate against the server at HTTP level, and then of course they authenticate against WordPress. And something else, I think we can change the login URL. Now, this is like, I will debate, like, listen, is it effective? Yeah, you can still guess somehow the URL of a WordPress website, the login URL of a WordPress website. It's just a question of, again, like making it a bit harder. Just every little step, hopefully. Don't look at this as just one change, the whole, every step, you do everything you do exactly at the bigger picture, and hopefully that helps. I think overall, I mean, we pretty much covered. There's a bit more we can do, of course. We can discuss the MySQL rows and parts, but maybe before we jump there, or we can leave that for the next session, something important to mention, like kind of like we are kind of like looking at this as if securing your WordPress website from the outside. What about keeping your WordPress secure, as in even like in terms of mistakes and stuff from the inside? Maybe you have a lot of, I would assume you have an e-commerce website, your customers wouldn't have an admin account most probably, no? So I'm presuming we can use roles. And maybe can you expand a bit more, Joel, what user roles are exactly when it comes to WordPress?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So each WordPress user needs to have a user role. So WordPress works on a system of capabilities. So anything that you can do is a capability. So writing a new post, there's a capability. Changing a setting, there's a capability. And those capabilities are assigned to user roles. And then users are assigned user roles. So this means that you don't have to assign the capabilities, and you don't have to assign individual capabilities to each user every time you create a user. You assign the capabilities to user roles, and then when you create a new user, you assign them the user roles. Now, in IT, not just IT, but there is this principle called the principle of least privilege, which basically states that any given user should only have access to the things they need to do their job, not more, not less.
Good.
And what this does is basically it reduces the risk of, for example, someone changing a setting that they should not have. Now, WordPress does include a number of user roles out of the box. And if you install certain plugins, such as WooCommerce, for example, it adds its own user roles. But your organization or website or entity, whatever, it might have some business functions which the user roles that come with WordPress out of the box do not sort of cater for. So at that point, you won't be able to assign them a lower user role. What you need to do is assign them a higher one, which basically means the users are gaining access to rights that they should not have, to capabilities that they should not have. So at that point, to basically stay in line with the principle, with best practices and the principle of least privilege, installing a user role plugin allows you to create a custom role that basically includes access to those capabilities and just those that the user needs.
Good. Yeah. So basically, this is a very important point that you mentioned it, because it's also, of course, about security. Like if you have customers who have accounts on your website, who have actual users on your website, it's still security. You don't want them to have access to settings of your e-commerce store, for example. So yeah, it's very important. I think even based on my experience, I've seen it quite often, not just in WordPress, even when I was working as a systems engineer in other software companies. It takes some time usually to figure out, especially if a plugin doesn't have its own custom roles, like to figure out, I don't know, let's say you have an SEO plugin on your website and you have someone purely responsible for SEO on your website. Ideally, they should have access only to the settings of that plugin and maybe the SEO settings each blog post or page. If that plugin you are using doesn't create custom rows, I understand it's always easier to just give someone admin access because it's not going to stop them, it's not going to hinder any processes, it doesn't slow them down. But I can guarantee it's and I've seen it a lot in the past, like especially with databases. I remember back in the days, like some web applications, some accounting software. As soon as they say, like, give us admin access to the database, so the software works. It shouldn't be. It will take definitely, especially during the hardening process, it will take some time to find out which capabilities a plugin is using, which capabilities a user role needs to be able to complete certain functions. But it's definitely worth the effort. So I think I highly recommend using some sort of user role plugin to create your own custom roles, and yeah, take your time, especially in the first few days, to nail down those roles, because it is not just about trust or something, like even like in terms of day-to-day practicality. Everyone makes mistakes, and the last thing you want is like someone maybe who doesn't have the technical expertise to do certain things, to have access to certain things. So it's very important to spend a bit of time and assign the right privileges to everyone. Ideally, they should have the right privileges for them to do work, nothing more or nothing less. Before we recap a bit, just a quick reminder that we do this live Q&A discussions on a weekly basis every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European Time or at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I think so. Basically, I mean, as we said in the beginning, there's definitely much more we can do. There's a lot that we can do, but we will recap what we discussed. But by doing these, basically, you're definitely, unless we had just another second before we recap, we have another question. It's quite interesting. It was like something similar to one of last week. Like, how does an SSL/TLS certificate helps with website security? I think we discussed this last week, Joel. Like, basically, a certificate is mainly used to encrypt the traffic between the web server and the client, the browser of the client. However, we miss some other things, like, because usually there are certificates which you can buy for other purposes, right? There are like this what we call the organization validation. So basically, a certificate is not just to encrypt the traffic, but it also kind of like a certificate, like it proves that the websites your browser is you are viewing, you are seeing, is actually who they claim to be. There are extended validations, different types of validations, right, Joel? That's basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. So just to recap, we do this on a weekly basis. If you're watching the recorded version, please you can send us any questions that you might have at questions@malapress.com. What we discussed today, there's definitely much more that you can do, a lot, but by doing what we have discussed today, you're already like in a very, very good place, especially if you have I wouldn't say small, but yeah, small to medium business website. Of course, the more customizations you add, the more stuff you add to the website, the more functionality, the more you need to look into it. So it's very important. We'll go through the hiding process. So Joel, what did you say? We start with the users, right? We have 2FA and...
So we started with the password policies and factor authentication.
Very good.
Password policies ensuring that passwords follow best practices. That's password length, so not 5 characters, 8, 12. And the complexity, upper lowercase characters, alphanumeric, special characters. Make sure that passwords expire every month, 2-3 months, and avoid password recycling. That is, using previously used passwords. On top of that, then we discussed two-factor authentication, which basically forces the user to authenticate twice, first through username and password, and then through a second authentication method. There are several available, such as the OTP, which is the Authenticator app, email, links or codes, hardware keys, SMS, passkeys. There are quite a few.
Good.
We also discussed secondary authentication methods. So what happens if the primary 2FA method fails? Then there are such things as backup codes or sending a link via or a code via email. We discussed limiting login attempts. So login attempt is user entering their username and password and pressing login. That's a login attempt. A failed login attempt is either username or password or both. Do not match what's in the database, basically. So limiting the number of wrong sort of guesses that a user has, 3, 5 usually. We discussed those. We discussed geo-blocking as well. So if, for example, we know that all of our users are from a certain country, then we can basically allow login attempts only from those countries. And that reduces the risk of a breach attempt.
Good.
And discuss changing the login URL, as Robert said. It's not silver bullet. Nothing is. This is part of what is called security by obscurity, and again, it's something that will lower the risk a little bit more.
Good. And on top of that, of course, a good backup solution, a good firewall, some sort of firewall, either it's plugin or online firewall, an activity log, some sort of logs. They're very important. Logs are extremely important, and always when it comes to privileges or giving users access, always work with the principle of least privileges. Use some sort of user role plugins to create your custom roles if you need, to allow users only to access only specific capabilities. As we said, there's way more that you can do, but just by doing these, you're pretty much covered. And on top of all this, always make sure you keep your software up to date. Always, not just WordPress, by the way, not WordPress core only, but also like your computer, your mobile device, and stuff like that. Always make sure you have a backup and that you can restore your backup. And I think nowadays it's almost standard with every web host, but just in case worth mentioning, make sure you have an TLS/SSL certificate for your website. Nowadays it's available for free via Let's Encrypt, and there are also like very easy to use plugins if you're not sure. I mean, most web hosts, it just works, especially if it's a WordPress managed web host, it works out of the box. But if you are not sure, there are so many solutions available out there. It's very easy to use plugins. I think that's it. Next week, so basically we discussed in our first session, how to restore a hacked WordPress website. This week we discussed how to harden security of your website. I think do we have a subject already for next week, Joel? I'm not sure, or we have it or we haven't.
It hasn't been nailed down yet, but we will update through our social media channels. And then,
very good. Yeah. You can always we have our
make sure you follow us.
Exactly. Facebook page, LinkedIn, Twitter or X, whatever it's called. And before we close, a quick reminder: like if you are watching a recorded session of this, if you have questions, please send us your questions via email at questions@wordpress.com. In fact, some of the questions of today were basically general questions we received over the last few weeks. Thank you for watching. And actually, I have next week. Actually, we'll be discussing the post-mortem process. So basically, we will be seeing we recovered from a hacked website, we hardened the security, and now it's time to go back to the backup you've done when your website is hacked to find out exactly, ideally, what happened there. So you can, of course, if there's an issue that still exists on your website, we can address that one so it doesn't get hacked again. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channels, and we will see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.